The rain lashed against the tower and glass panes of the Grand Palacio Hotel, its relentless rhythm a muffled symphony against the elegant murmur of the dining room. Inside, crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors and tables draped in linen so fine it shimmered. The air was scented with freshly baked bread and the faint, sophisticated perfume of the city's elite. Isabella Marquez adjusted the cuffs of her crisp black uniform and studied the silver tray balanced effortlessly on her palm. At 22, she had perfected the art of invisibility, moving silently through a room filled with Mexico City's most powerful without drawing a single stray glance. It was a skill that kept her in the good graces of management, and one she clung to fiercely. Working here paid for her psychology studies at the Universidad Nacional and kept her mother and two younger siblings in Puebla afloat. Her schedule was relentless: morning lectures, rushed bus rides, afternoon shifts at the hotel, and late nights finishing assignments in her cramped apartment. Still, Isabella had long ago decided that dreams required sacrifice. She wove between tables with the practiced grace of someone who couldn't afford a single mistake. Her dark eyes scanned the dining room, noting subtle gestures from diners, an empty water glass here, a raised eyebrow there. The smallest misstep could mean the loss of a type or worse, her job. The presence that commanded the room. She was crossing toward the reservation desk when a deep, smooth voice stopped her mid-step. "Excuse me, miss." The sound of it seemed to cut through the clinking of crystal and low hum of conversation. Isabella looked up and straight into the most striking green eyes she had ever seen. The man before her was impossible to miss. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that whispered of Italian craftsmanship, his black hair swept back with casual perfection. He carried himself the way men do when they have never been refused anything in their lives. "How may I help you, sir?" Isabella asked, keeping her tone professional even as something in her chest tightened. There was an intensity in his gaze, the predatory appraisal she had learned to ignore from other wealthy guests spit something that felt sharper, deeper. "Alexander Cortez," he said, extending a hand with a confidence born of power. "I have a reservation for tonight's business dinner. Table for 6. The name landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through her mind. Everyone in the hotel knew the Cortez family. They owned Cortez International, the most prestigious luxury hotel chain in Latin America, with properties stretching from Mexico City to Buenos Aires. And Alexander wasn't just a name on the masthead who was the heir apparent, groomed from birth to inherit an empire worth billions. A spark she couldn't ignore. "Of course, Mr. Cortez. Allow me to confirm your reservation," Isabella replied, forcing her steps toward the podium to remain steady. She could feel his gaze follow her, and she refused to let it fluster her. "Your table is ready, sir," she said, after checking the book. "Table 12, overlooking the fountain garden." When she lifted her eyes from the page, Alexander was still watching her with idle curiosity, but as if she were the most interesting thing in the room. "Perfect," he said. "And your name?" "Isabella Marquez, at your service." "Isabella," he repeated slowly, as though testing how her name tasted on his tongue. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she kept her smile professional. "Thank you, sir. Shall I escort you to your table?" An evening of stolen glances. For the next 3 hours, Isabella attended personally to table 12. Alexander's dinner guests, 3 men in sharp suits, 2 women in designer dresses, were absorbed in discussions of international expansions, strategic mergers, and whispered alliances. Yet, somehow, he always found a moment to meet her eyes when the others weren't looking. When she refilled his wine, he asked, "Is everything always this flawless here?" "We try our best, Mr. Cortez," she replied, aware of the way her voice softened under his attention. Later, as she set down dessert, he said quietly, "The food is excellent, but the service." His gaze held hers a heartbeat longer than necessary. "It is exceptional." It wasn't the words that made her pulse quicken, it was the way he said them, as if he meant something more. An invitation she didn't expect. When the dinner ended and his guests drifted toward the lobby, Alexander lingered behind. The restaurant was nearly empty. The light dimmed to a warm amber glow. "I'd like to invite you for coffee tomorrow," he said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. "If you'll allow me." Isabella blinked. "Mr. Cortez, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. I work here, and you're a man," he interrupted softly, "who just met an extraordinary woman and doesn't want to lose the chance to know her better. Not as your employer, Isabella, but as Alexander." Her heart gave a sharp, disloyal leap. Everything about this was dangerous. She knew who he waste kind of man photographed beside actresses and socialites in glossy magazines. She also knew who she was, a waitress with a scholarship and many responsibilities to risk. "I need to think about it," she said finally. He placed a card beside the most generous tip she'd ever received. "If you decide yes, call me tomorrow." A night of restless thoughts. Back in her small apartment in Roma Norte, Isabella set the card on her nightstand. She shared the place with Rosa Alvarez, her best friend from university, also a psychology student, also surviving on endless part-time work. When Isabella told her what had happened, Rosa nearly dropped her mug of tea. "Alexander Cortez asked you out." The Alexander Cortez who's in Forbes Mexico every year? It wasn't exactly a date, Isabella protested. "He just said he wanted to get to know me." Rosa raised an eyebrow. "Please, men like him don't chase women like us unless they have a reason. He dates supermodels. Acer, what could he possibly want with a waitress?" The words landed like cold water. Rosa wasn't wrong. Isabella was a student with rent to pay and a family counting on her. She thought of her mother's voice, steady and strong even in the hardest years. "Study hard, major. Education is the one thing no one can take from you. Never depend on a man for your future." And yet, lying in bed, Isabella kept replaying the way Alexander had said her name. Sunday passed in slow motion, every hour thick with indecision. Isabella threw herself into her psychology readings, cleaning the apartment, even helping Rosa reorganize their pantry, anything to avoid looking at the ivory business card resting on her nightstand. She told herself she had already made her choice. No, it was safer that way. Men like Alexander Cortez didn't belong in her world, and she didn't belong in his. She'd worked too hard to risk everything on a fleeting infatuation, but every time her phone buzzed, her pulse leaped instantly to crash when it was just a friend, a classmate, or a notification from her study group. By her Monday afternoon break at the hotel, her resolve had begun to unravel. A message hidden in plain sight. She slipped into the small staff lounge, poured herself a coffee from the machine, and finally allowed herself to look at the card again. The embossed gold lettering gleamed against the smooth white surface. Alexander Cortez, Cortez International. But it wasn't the name or the title that caught her breath, it was the neat line of handwriting on the back, something she hadn't noticed before. "Thank you for making a business night feel special." It was not the voice of a man used to buying attention. It was something almost human. Before she could overthink it again, Isabella's fingers were dialing the number, the call that opened the door. The line rang twice before a rich, familiar voice answered. "Alexander Cortez." "Mr. Cortez, this is Isabella Marquez from the Grand Palacio Hotel." A beat of silence seemed, then a warmth in his tone that made her stomach flip. "Isabella, I was hoping you'd call. I thought maybe you decided against it." "I almost did," she admitted, "but I'd like to have that coffee, if the offer still stands." "It does, more than ever. Do you know Café Central in the historic district? It's quiet, and we can talk without interruption." "Yes, I know it. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, after your shift." "I remembered you said you finish early on Tuesdays." Her eyebrows lifted, remembered her schedule. "That works," she said softly. The night before, that evening, she sat at her desk, textbook open, but untouched. Her mind kept skipping ahead to the next afternoon, what she would wear, what she might say, whether he would be different outside the hotel's golden-lit dining room. Rosa was stretched out on the couch, half watching a telenovela. "So you're going," she said casually, Without looking up, Isabella hesitated. "It's just coffee." Rose's smirk was audible in her voice. "Coffee with a billionaire who looks at you like you're the only woman in the room. Don't kid yourself. Is that you're not going for the caffeine?" Isabella didn't answer. She didn't want to admit that Roser was right. The next day, she left work 15 minutes early. Hurrying through the cobblestone streets of the historic center, Café Central was just as she remembered, warm lighting spilling across exposed brick walls, shelves lined with coffee beans in glass jars, the faint hiss of steam from the espresso machine. She arrived 5 minutes ahead of schedule, wearing her best white blouse and navy skirt, her long hair pulled into a simple, elegant bun. She debated for far too long whether to wear lipstick, finally settling on a soft rose shade that made her feel just a little braver. At precisely 4 o'clock, the door opened. Alexander walked in wearing dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, and a leather jacket that gave him a disarmingly relaxed air. His green eyes found hers instantly, and his smile, slow, genuine, made the rest of the cafe disappear. "You came," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek in greeting. The faint scent of cedarwood cologne curled in her senses, making it hard to remember how to breathe. "I said I would," she replied, praying her voice didn't betray her racing heartbeat. "And I'm always punctual." "That," he said, sliding into the seat across from her, "is a quality I admire greatly. In my world, too many people think arriving late is a show of importance." Stories over coffee, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. He asked about her classes, not out of politeness, but with a genuine interest that made her want to share more. She told him about her dream of becoming a family therapist, of helping people through the kind of hardships her own family had endured. "What made you choose psychology?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. She hesitated only a moment. "When I was 16, my younger brother Diego fell into a deep depression after our father left. We didn't know if he would ever come back to use emotionally. I mean, there was a therapist at the community center, Dr. Ramirez, who worked with him for months, never charging us a cent. She gave our family hope again. I want to be that person for someone else." Alexander's expression softened in a way that made her chest ache. "That must have been incredibly difficult for all of you." "It was. My mother worked double shifts at a textile factory to keep us afloat. That's when I decided if I can help even one family the way she helped ours, it will be worth everything." The question she couldn't hold back. As the sun dipped lower, painting the streets outside in warm gold, Isabella felt herself leaning closer to him across the small table. It wasn't just his charm, there was something in the way he listened, as if nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything. You could be with any woman you want, models, actresses, women from your own circle." "Why me?" "A student who waits tables." He set down his coffee cup, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Because for years, I've been surrounded by people who see dollar signs before they see my face. They know the size of my bank account before they know my favorite color. And then I met you. You looked me in the eye and treated me like just a man, not the heir to Cortez International, not a headline." Walking into the evening, when the cafe began to empty, neither of them wanted the moment to end. Alexander suggested a walk, and they wandered through the historic streets, their voices blending with the evening hum of the city. He told her about the pressure of his role with expectation to lead the family business, the deals made at dinners where every word was measured. "Sometimes I feel like my whole life was scripted before I was born," he admitted. "Even who I should marry someday. My mother already has her list." "That must feel suffocating," Isabella said quietly. "It is. That's why this," he gestured between them, "feels so different, so real." The first kiss. They stopped in front of the Palacio de Bellas Artes, its white marble facade glowing under the city lights. She glanced at her watch, startled to see how much time had passed. "I should go," she murmured. "It's late." "I'll drive you," he offered immediately. She shook her head. "Not yet. I don't want you to see where I live. Not today." He didn't press. Instead, he took her hands gently. "Can I see you again?" She hesitated, then smiled. Yes, but doesn't it worry you? People seeing us together? Isabella, I don't care what they say. I care about how I feel when I'm with you. Under the soft spill of streetlights, he leaned down and kissed her slow, warm, and hurried. A kiss that carried no demand, only promise. For the next 3 weeks, Isabella's world quietly shifted on its axis. It began with messages late at night short, sometimes teasing, sometimes thoughtful. Then came early morning calls before her shift at the hotel, just to wish her a good day. They met in tucked-away cafes and strolled through parks at dawn, careful to choose places where the likelihood of recognition was slim. Alexander's world was one of constant eyes, whispered gossip, and cameras hidden in plain sight. Isabella's was the opposite to quiet, predictable, anonymous, and yet, when they were together, those worlds seemed to fold into each other, creating a space that felt entirely theirs. Discovering who he really was. On their fourth meeting, Alexander took her to a small, private gallery in a converted warehouse. I'm the only investor in this place, he explained as they wandered through the minimalist space. It's where young artists can show their work without the constraints of the commercial market. The pride in his voice was different from the polished confidence she had seen in the hotel dining room. This was personal. They're talented, Isabella said, pausing before a vivid oil painting. You really care about this. I do. But in my world, people assume every decision is about money or image. This, he gestured to the paintings, isn't for anyone but me. And now you. She glanced at him, catching that glimmer of vulnerability beneath his usual composure. It was becoming a familiar and dangerous sight, a sight of the city she'd never seen. He began showing her a Mexico City she had never known existed. Rooftop restaurants with gardens that seemed to float above the streets. Quiet bookshops in San Angel, where the scent of old pages clung to the air. One Saturday morning, they walked through Chapultepec Park, sunlight filtering through the leaves. He told her, almost shyly, I studied business administration in Switzerland, but what I really wanted was to become an archaeologist. An archaeologist, she repeated, surprised. Yes, I've always been fascinated by pre-Hispanic civilizations. Their art, their architecture, their understanding of time. But the business needed an heir, and I was the eldest son. The rest was decided for me before I could even choose. She thought of the heaviness in his voice, and of how lonely it must be to live a life designed by someone else. Her world, too. In her own life, pressures were mounting. Her mother, Carmen, called from Puebla one Sunday evening. You sound different, Major. Happier, but distracted. Is there something you're not telling me? Isabella's fingers twisted in the phone cord. Just school and work, Mama. The semester's heavy. It was easier than explaining the truth that she was seeing a man whose name would cause her mother both pride and worry in equal measure. Rosa was less subtle. One night, when Isabella returned from what she insisted was a study group, Rosa arched an eyebrow. You're glowing, Easter, and you're getting mysterious texts that make you smell like you're hiding something from me. Spill. It's nothing serious, Isabella said, but the heat rising to her cheeks gave her away. Rosa murmured, clearly unconvinced. The first shadow. 3 weeks into their courtship, Isabella was clearing tables at the hotel's restaurant when she caught a ripple of surprise among the staff. A tall, elegant woman had entered her vision in a pearl gray suit, silver hair perfectly set, posture like a queen surveying her domain. Miss Marquez, the woman said, her voice smooth but with an edge of command. We need to talk. Isabella's stomach dropped. She didn't need to be told who this was. Mrs. Cortez, she managed, keeping her tone neutral. How can I help you? We'll speak in the private salon. Now, it was not a request. The confrontation. The salon on the mezzanine was all polished with and soft lighting. Mrs. Cortez took one of the leather armchairs as though it were a throne. Isabella remained standing. I'll be direct. The older woman began. I know about your involvement with my son, Mrs. Cortez. Please don't insult my intelligence. Alexander has been distracted these past weeks. Happier, yes, but different. I have people who keep me informed. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a manila envelope. With precise movements, she opened it and slid its contents across the table. Photographs clear as day off, Isabella and Alexander walking in Chapultepec Park, laughing in a quiet cafe, holding hands in the golden light of evening. Isabella's hands curled into fists at her sides. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "The ultimatum. I want you to understand the reality," Mrs. Cortez said, her voice cooling even further. "Alexander has responsibilities that go far beyond personal feelings. Our family's business employs thousands. Our name carries weight in international markets. He needs a wife who understands that world." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You seem like a decent young woman, intelligent, hard-working, but love, Miss Marquez, is not always enough." Isabella forced herself to meet the older woman's gaze. "Are you asking me to leave him? I'm asking you to think about what's best for everyone, including yourself. The scrutiny, the constant analysis of your every move, the pressure to represent one of Mexico's most prominent families, it will change you, and not for the better." Mrs. Cortez reached into her bag again and set a cream-colored envelope on a table. "This is a full scholarship to complete your degree at any university you choose, plus funding for specialization abroad. All I ask is that you end your relationship with my son before it goes any further." Alone with the decision, when Mrs. Cortez left, Isabella sat for a long time in the empty salon, staring at the envelope. Her mind was a whirlwind. It was more than generous, it was everything she had ever wanted for her career. But it came with the cost of giving up the one thing she had begun to want even more. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The words of Alexander's mother mingled with her own doubts. Can I fit into his world? Am I strong enough for the pressure, the judgment, the whispers? Her phone lit up with Alexander's name. She almost didn't answer. "Isabella," he said immediately. "What's wrong? You sound upset." "It's been a difficult day," she replied. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The following evening, Isabella arrived early at their usual cafe in Roma Norte. She had rehearsed the words all day, each variation ending in a knot in her stomach. The low hum of conversation and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee did nothing to ease the tension twisting in her chest. When Alexander walked in, wearing a simple navy blazer over an open-collared shirt, his smile was instant kind of smile that used to make her forget everything else. But tonight, it only made the lump in her throat grow heavier. "You look tired," he said gently, sliding into the seat across from her. His warm hand reached across the table to cover hers. "Are you sure you're all right?" Isabella inhaled slowly. "No turning back now. Alexander, your mother came to see me yesterday." The shift in his eyes, his smile vanished as though someone had flipped a switch. The light in his green eyes hardened into something sharp and cold. "What did she say?" His voice was low, but beneath it was the unmistakable edge of barely contained anger. "She knows about us. She has photographs." Isabella pulled out her phone, swiping to the images Mrs. Cortez had shown her, clear shots of them together, too clear to explain away. She slid the phone toward him. Alexander's jaw flexed as he studied them. What kind of offer did she make? Isabella's fingers tightened round her coffee cup. "A full scholarship to finish my degree anywhere I want. Funding for a specialization abroad. All in exchange for," she swallowed hard, "for leaving you." The outburst. The chair legs screeched against the floor as Alexander stood abruptly. A few patrons turned to stare, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "I can't believe she did this," he said through clenched teeth. "I'm going to speak to her right now." "Alexander, wait." Isabella caught his arm, her fingers curling into the fabric of his sleeve. "Sit down, please. There's more we need to talk about." His gaze softened only slightly, but he obeyed, lowering himself back into his chair. Still, his whole body seemed coiled, ready to spring. "I don't care what my mother offered you," he said firmly. "I don't care what she threatened. I love you, Isabella, and nothing she says or does will change that." Her voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "But what if she's right? What if we're too different? What if I can't fit into your world? Refusing to let go, Alexander leaned forward, capturing both her hands in his. His voice was steady now, but intense. My world is empty without you. These past weeks have been the happiest of my entire life. Don't let her fear, or mine, take this away from us. She searched his face, torn between the pull of his conviction and the reality of his mother's words. It wasn't just about Levi, it was about everything that came with it. I don't want to be the reason you're at war with your family, she murmured. You're not the reason, he replied, his tone decisive. The war was inevitable the moment I decided I wouldn't live my life according to someone else's script. The confrontation at Los Lizas. That night, Alexander didn't wait. By 10 p.m., he was pulling into the long, lantern-lit driveway of the Cortez family estate in Los Lizas. The heavy oak doors swung open to reveal the grandeur he had grown up in. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the silence that felt more like judgment than comfort. His mother was in her study, a fortress of polished mahogany and meticulously organized ledgers. She looked up from a stack of financial reports with the calm precision of a woman who never allowed herself to be surprised. How dare you? Alexander said without preamble, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. How dare you go behind my back and threaten Isabella? Elena Cortez set down her papers as though she were merely pausing a meeting. I did what any mother would do to protect her son from a mistake that could ruin his life. Mistake? His tone was sharp enough to cut glass. The only mistake here is thinking you have the right to decide who I love. A mother's warning. Be realistic, she replied, her voice steady, almost wary. That girl comes from a completely different world. She has no idea what it means to be part of this family. Her name is Isabella, Alexander snapped, and she's worth more than all the socialites you've ever paraded in front of me. Elena sighed, folding her hands on the desk. Love isn't enough to overcome certain differences. Alexander, I learned that the hard way. Something in her tone caught him off guard, something almost human. What do you mean? The secret she never shared. She rose from her chair and walked to the tall window, gazing out over the manicured gardens that stretched toward the moonlit horizon. Before I married your father, I loved someone else, she admitted quietly. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't from any acceptable family. He was a teacher kid, intelligent, everything I wanted. What happened? Alexander asked, his voice softening despite himself. What always happens when the pressure becomes unbearable, she said. The constant criticism, the subtle exclusions, the feeling of being an outsider no matter how hard you try. It destroyed us. She turned back to him, her eyes sharper again. I won't watch you go through that. The line he wouldn't cross. I appreciate the history, Alexander said evenly, but that doesn't give you the right to decide for me. If Isabella and I fail, it will be our choice and our mistake to make. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're determined to make this difficult. I'm determined to make ours, he corrected. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them was taut, like a rope pulled to its breaking point. Finally, Eleanor turned back to her desk. Very well, but remember, every decision has consequences. For you, for her. Alexander left without another word. But as he stepped into the cold night air, the warning echoed in his mind. Across the city, that same night, Isabella sat curled up on the worn sofa she shared with Roser. The hum of late-night traffic outside was a distant backdrop to the storm raging in her mind. She had told Roser everything, the relationship, the ultimatum, the offer that could change her life and her family's future. Rosa listened without interrupting, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and fierce loyalty. When Isabella finished, she leaned back, folding her arms. So let me get this straight, Roser said slowly. The mother of Alexander Cortezes, that Alexander walked into your workplace, threatened you with photographs, and then offered you a golden ticket out of every struggle you've ever had if you just walk away. Isabella nodded miserably. A full scholarship, any university, funding for a specialization abroad. Rosa, do you realize what that means for me? For my family, I do, Rosa said, and I also realize what it means for your heart. Between sense and feeling, Isabella buried her face in her hands. I love him, Rosa, but maybe she's right. Maybe we're too different. Maybe I'd be better off taking the offer and avoiding years of a feeling like I don't belong. Or maybe, Rosa countered, leaning forward, you'd be better off ignoring the voice in your head that tells you you're not enough. Isabella looked up, startled. Rosa's eyes were sharp with the kind of honesty only a best friend could deliver. You've been glowing these last few weeks, Rosa said, laughing more. Actually living. I haven't seen that in you for years. If you give this up because of fear, yours or his mother, she will regret it. And that regret will stay with you longer than any scholarship. Isabella swallowed hard. But what if love isn't enough? Maybe it isn't, Rosa admitted. But maybe sometimes it's worth the risk anyway. The long night. That night, Isabella lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The city lights cast shifting patterns on the walls, and the echoes of Rosa's words chased away any chance of sleep. Her mind replayed moments with Alexander, the way he looked at her when she spoke about her dreams, the way he made time for her despite his suffocating schedule, the gentleness in his voice when he said her name. She realized something then. She had been making her decisions out of fear for years. Fear of failing her family, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of not being enough. And for the first time, she didn't want to let fear be the one in control. 2 weeks later, the gala, the annual Cortez Foundation Charity Gala, was one of Mexico City's most glittering nights of the year. Politicians, industrialists, and the country's most influential figures filled the marble halls of the National Museum of Anthropology. Alexander was there because he had to be, not because he wanted to. Since their last conversation, Isabella had asked for time to think. He had respected that, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He stood near the main exhibition hall, making polite conversation with a group of family acquaintances, when a murmur swept through the crowd. People were turning toward the grand marble staircase. Conversations stalled. Champagne flutes paused midair. Alexander followed their gaze, and then he forgot how to breathe. The entrance that stopped the room, descending the staircase, was Isabella. She wore a floor-length black gown that hugged her figure with understated elegance, her dark hair in loose waves that gleamed under the chandelier light. Every step she took was measured and graceful, but there was steel in her posture. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, she carried herself like she belonged in that room, and no one dared say otherwise. Alexander started moving toward her before he even realized it. Every other face, every other voice, blurred into insignificance. When their eyes met across the crowd, time seemed to fracture, leaving only the two of them in focus. The confrontation in public. You came, he said when he reached her, his voice unsteady with relief. I came to give you an answer, she replied, her voice calm but her pulse racing. Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut in. Elena, Alexander's mother, appeared at his side, her face a perfect mask of controlled irritation. Miss Moreno, what exactly are you doing here? This is a private, invitation-only event. I was invited, Isabella said smoothly, producing an embossed invitation card. By your son. Alexander Blanket hadn't sent her an invitation, but then, over Isabella's shoulder, he caught sight of Rosa standing by the entrance, grinning like the mastermind she clearly was. Drawing the line. Camila, we need to talk, Elena said, lowering her voice to avoid drawing more attention. No, Mrs. Cortez, Isabella said evenly. We've already talked. Now it's my turn. She turned fully toward Alexander, her voice still soft, but carrying just enough to be heard by those nearest. You asked me what I decided about your mother's offer. Alexander's breath caught. My answer is no, Isabella said clearly. I don't want her scholarship. I don't want her money. What I want is you. Choosing the hard road. A ripple of murmurs passed through the nearby guests, but Isabella didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed locked on Alexander's. I know we come from different worlds. I know there will be people who don't approve, but I also know that I love you, and I believe that's worth fighting for. Alexander's throat tightened. Are you sure? You understand what this means? It means I choose you. I choose US with everything that comes with it. And then, in full view of Mexico City's most powerful and judgmental audience, Alexander pulled her into his arms and kissed her slow, certain, and completely unapologetic. The final word to Eleanor. When they parted, Isabella turned to face Elena directly. There's something you should know, Mrs. Cortez. Something I told your son the first night we were alone together. The air in the room seemed to still. I told him no one had ever touched me before, that I had never been with any man. I gave him my heart and my trust because I love him, not because of his money or status. A stunned silence followed. Elena's eyes flickered not with scorn, but with something closer to respect. Alexander tightened his hold on Isabella's hands, and I told her she was the first woman who had ever made me feel truly alive. A mother's change of heart. Eleanor studied them both for a long moment, and then, to everyone's surprise, she nodded once. Very well, she said softly. If this is what you truly want, you'll have my support. But understand this. Isabella being part of this family comes with responsibilities. Heavy ones. I understand. Isabella replied without hesitation, and I promise I won't disappoint you. Alexander's hand squeezed hers, pride radiating through his touch. In that moment, it no longer felt like a battle. It felt like the beginning of something they would fight for together. 6 months later, the world outside their love story seemed to have shifted. The whispers that had once followed Isabella Moreno through the grand corridors of Mexico City's elite circles had quieted not because the gossip had stopped, but because Alexander Cortez had made it clear that his choice was final. And now, in the private chapel of the Cortez family estate, Isabella stood before a tall arched mirror in a gown the color of morning light, the silk catching in soft waves around her. The morning of, her mother, Mary Anna, fussed with the lace along the neckline, eyes brimming with emotion. You're beautiful, mihija, Mary Anna whispered, her voice thick with tears. But more importantly, you're happy. That's all I ever prayed for. Isabella smiled, catching her mother's hands in her own. I am Mama. Truly, the reflection in the mirror wasn't the same young woman who had once been afraid to even dream of this life. She had finished her psychology degree with honors just 2 months before, with a full specialization in family therapy already in motion. But it wasn't the gown, the makeup, or even the academic accomplishments that transformed her. It was the steady certainty in her heart that she was exactly where she wanted to be. Alexander's perspective. In another room of the estate, Alexander was pacing. His best man, Raphael, watched him with amused patience. You look like you're about to negotiate a billion-dollar merger, Raphael teased. This is bigger than any deal I've ever made, Alexander replied, adjusting his cufflinks for the 3rd time. This is the rest of my life. You sure about her? Raphael asked, though his tone was knowing. She's not from our world. That's not a criticism, it's a fact. Alexander stopped pacing, his gaze sharp but calm. That's the best part. She's not from our world. She keeps me human. She reminds me that life is more than deals and headlines. She's everything. The ceremony, the chapel's wooden pews were filled with family, close friends, and a few carefully chosen guests. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, scattering warm color across the stone floor. A string quartet played softly in the corner. When the doors opened and Isabella stepped inside on her mother's arm, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Alexander's chest tightened as his eyes met hers. The chatter of society, the resistance of his family, the months of uncertainty of it dissolved in that single moment. She reached him at the altar, her hand slipping into his, warm and steady. The vows, they had chosen to write their own vows. That first night, Alexander began, his deep voice carrying through the chapel. You told me no one had ever touched you before. Today, I promise that no one will ever love you the way I do. That no matter how much the world changes, I will be your home, your constant, your partner in everything." Isabella's voice trembled as she spoke her vows, but her words were clear. "And I promise that you will always be the only one who truly knows my heart. I will stand beside you, not because of the life you can give me, but because of the life we will build together. You believed in me when I doubted myself, and I will spend the rest of my life believing in us." The reception was held in the estate's garden, where strings of golden lights drape over centuries-old trees and tables bloomed with white roses. Alexander and Isabella danced their first dance to a slow, timeless melody, their movements unhurried and entirely their own. Elena Cortez, who had once stood firmly against their relationship, watched from her table. She didn't say much that night, but her gaze lingered on the way her son looked at his bride with a devotion she had never seen in him before. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet relief. Maybe this young woman was exactly what her family needed. Life after the yes, the weeks that followed were an adjustment. Isabella moved into Alexander's penthouse overlooking the heart of the city. At first, the marble floors, endless windows, and discreet stuff felt like stepping into someone else's dream. But Alexander had insisted on small touches, fresh flowers in her favorite colors, a reading nook by the window, a corner for her therapy books, and notes that slowly made it theirs. Mornings began with shared breakfasts before Alexander's meetings. Evenings often ended on the balcony, the city glittering below, as Isabella told him about her studies and he shared the battles of the business world. A partnership, Isabella had worried she might feel like an ornament in Alexander's life, but he made it clear from the start that he wanted a partner, not a bystander. She attended planning meetings for the Cortez Foundation, offering insight into mental health programs and family counseling initiatives. Her ideas were met with genuine interest not just from Alexander, but from the entire board. "You don't just belong here," Alexander told her one night after a foundation dinner. "You're changing it." And he meant it. The whispered thank you every night, without fail. When they were alone and the world's demands had faded into silence, Alexander would draw her close and murmur into her ear, "Thank you for trusting me with your heart that first night." And she would answer, without hesitation, "Thank you for believing it was worth protecting." The first month of marriage was a blissful blur. Mornings filled with shared coffee, evenings spent watching the city lights from their balcony, quiet laughter in between. But life, especially life in Alexander Cortez's world, had a way of testing even the strongest beginnings. The Foundation Gala. It began with the Cortez Foundation's annual Winter Gala sprawling affair held at the historic Palacio de Bellas Artes. For Alexander, it was a necessary display of influence and generosity. For Isabella, it was her first public appearance as Mrs. Cortez. The moment they entered, heads turned, cameras flashed, a low hum of speculation rippled through the room. "She's beautiful, but where is she from?" Isabella heard one woman whisper to another, their jeweled hands covering their mouths in mock discretion. Alexander, sensing her stiffen, tightened his hand over hers. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They've been whispering about me since I was a teenager. You'll get used to it." Isabella forced a smile, but the truth was harder to swallow. She wasn't used to being the subject of gossip. In Puebla, she had been the girl who studied late at the library, who worked at the hotel to help her family. Here, she was a question mark wrapped in a designer gown. The backhanded compliments. Throughout the evening, she was introduced to socialites, business partners, and foreign dignitaries. Most were polite. Some genuinely warm, but others offered compliments so sharp they might as well have been insults. "You're much more poised than I expected," one woman said with a tight smile. "It must be overwhelming, stepping into a life like this," another remarked. "At least you have Alexander to guide you." Isabella responded graciously each time, but each comment lodged like a splinter. She found herself retreating to the edge of conversations, sipping champagne she didn't even like, scanning the crowd for Alexander, the unexpected critic. she found him speaking with an older man in a tailored navy-suited Eduardo Salazar, a family friend and former business partner of Alexander's father. Eduardo turned toward her with a charming smile. "So you're the young woman who finally convinced Alexander to settle down," he said. "I must admit, I didn't think it would happen." "Why not?" Isabella asked lightly, though she braced herself. Eduardo chuckled. "Alexander has always been particular. Ambitious men don't usually marry for love. They marry for advantage. But I suppose you're the exception to the rule." Isabella kept her expression neutral, but her stomach tightened. She excused herself under the pretense of checking on the silent auction, her heels clicking a little too quickly across the marble floor. The balcony. She found refuge on a side balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air was a relief after the stifling politeness inside. A moment later, Alexander joined her. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, stepping close enough that his warmth cut through the chill. "Talk to me." She hesitated, staring out at the glittering skyline. "Do they all think I don't belong?" Alexander exhaled slowly. "Some do. Some always will. But that's their problem, not yours." "It feels like my problem," she admitted quietly. "Like I have to prove myself to everyone." "You don't," he said firmly. "You only have to be you. That's the woman I married. That's the woman I'll defend against the entire room if I have to." Something in his tone of protective, unshakably ensured her. She leaned into him, letting the city fade behind them. The media twist. 2 days later, the headlines hit. From waitress to Mrs. Cortez, the Cinderella wedding that shook Mexico City. The article was full of glassy photographs from the Isabella, Alexander's arm, Isabella speaking to dignitaries, Isabella in a candid laugh. But the tone was laced with condescension, painting her as a charity case lifted into luxury. Rosa, her best friend, called within minutes. "Don't read the comments," she warned. But Isabella already had. They ranged from curiosity to cruelty, strangers dissecting her background, her appearance, even her motives for marrying Alexander. She closed her laptop and pressed her palms to her eyes, willing the sting of tears to pass. When Alexander came home that evening, she handed him the article without a word. Alexander's response. He read it in silence, jaw tightening. Then he closed the laptop and said, "We're suing." "Alexander," she began. "No, they don't get to rewrite your story just to sell gossip. They don't get to make you question yourself." She shook her head. "If we fight them, it becomes a bigger story. I don't want more attention." He searched her face, then softened. "Then we'll handle it your way. But promise me something, didn't let them define you. You're stronger than that." Turning the narrative, Isabella decided to fight back in her own way, not with lawyers, but with presence. She threw herself into the Cortez Foundation's projects, visiting schools, meeting with community leaders, speaking publicly about mental health and education. At first, the society columns covered her visits with thinly veiled skepticism, but over time, her sincerity began to win them over. She wasn't just the waitress who married the millionaire, she was becoming her own headline. The quiet moment. One evening, after a long day at a new community center, Isabella returned home to find Alexander waiting on the balcony with 2 glasses of wine. "You handled this month better than most people born into this life," he told her, handing her a glass. She smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." He shook his head. "No, you had courage. That's all you." They stood there as the city hummed below, knowing the storm had only just begun, but so had their strength to face it. The Cortez mansion had grown quiet after dinner, the soft hum of the city beyond the windows the only sound. Isabella sat in the library, a book open on her lap, but her mind far from its pages. Something in Alexander's mood had shifted over the past week. Small, subtle changes. He came home later, his phone calls more guarded, his gaze occasionally distant. She told herself it was work. In his world, deadlines and negotiations could swallow entire weeks, but the seed of worry had already been planted. The late-night visitor. It was nearly midnight when the doorbell rang. Isabella, curled under a throw blanket, frowned in surprise. Alexander was upstairs in his office, still working. She rose and went to answer it. Standing on the marble porch, dressed in a sleek black coat, was a woman Isabella had never met but instantly recognized from photographs in the society pages. Luciana Vega, heiress to a shipping fortune, poised and beautiful in the way of someone who had never known financial worry. She had been linked to Alexander in the past rumors of dinners, vacations, a friendship that many assumed would turn into something more. Mrs. Cortez, Luciana said smoothly, as though tasting the title. I realize it's late, but I thought it was time we met. Isabella's grip on the door tightened. I can have Alexander come down. Luciana's smile didn't reach her eyes. I was hoping to speak with you alone, the warning disguised as courtesy. They sat in the front parlor, the kind of room Isabella rarely used, its polished surfaces reflecting the warm light of the chandelier. Luciana crossed her legs with practiced grace, studying Isabella the way a jeweler studies a diamond searching for flaws. I've known Alexander for years, she began, her voice calm but edged. I care about him, which is why I feel concerned. Isabella kept her tone even. Concerned about what? Luciana leaned forward, her perfume subtle but expensive. He's a man born into a world with rules unspoken, but very real. Marriages in our circle aren't just about affection. They're alliances, strategies. You come from a different world entirely. I'm aware of that, Isabella said quietly. I'm sure you are, but awareness doesn't change reality. It's difficult to fit into this life without losing yourself. I've seen it before, and I'd hate to see Alexander suffer when you realize the cost. The provocation. Isabella studied her guest for a long moment. She realized then that Luciana's visit wasn't about concern, it was about staking a claim, reminding Isabella that there were others who believed they had a better right to stand at Alexander's side. You speak as though you know what's best for him, Isabella said. Luciana's gaze didn't waver. Perhaps I do. The air between them grew taut. Isabella could feel her pulse in her fingertips, but she forced her voice to remain calm. Alexander chose me, and unless that choice changes, it's not your place to question it. For the first time, Luciana's smile faltered, just slightly. She rose gracefully. I suppose time will tell, Mrs. Cortez. Alexander's reaction. When Luciana's car had disappeared into the night, Isabella went upstairs. Alexander was still at his desk, but he looked up immediately when she entered. You had a visitor, she said, his brow furrowed. Who? Luciana Vega. He set his pen down slowly. What did she want? Isabella hesitated. She said she was concerned for you, and for me. She thinks I won't last in this world. Alexander's jaw tightened. You don't need to take her seriously. She's persistent. She's been hoping for something between us for years, but it was never more than a friendship. She didn't speak like a friend, Isabella replied softly. He stood and came to her, taking her hands. Listen to me. She doesn't get to define us. No one does. You're my wife. That's the only truth that matters. The foundation project. 2 weeks later, Isabella found herself leading a major Cortez Foundation initiative, something Alexander had encouraged her to take on as a way of putting her own mark on the family's legacy. It was a redevelopment project in an underserved district of the city, combining education centers, job training programs, and community spaces. It was exhausting work meetings with architects, community leaders, and sponsors, but it was also deeply fulfilling. For the first time since the wedding, she felt she wasn't just Alexander's wife. She was building something of her own. The setback. Then came the setback. One of the primary donors, a corporation Alexander's company often partnered with, suddenly pulled their funding. No explanation, just a polite but final withdrawal. Isabella was in the foundation office when she got the call. Her stomach dropped. Without that money, the project would be delayed by months, possibly canceled altogether. That evening, Alexander found her still at her desk, papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. What happened? He asked. She told him. His expression darkened. I'll handle it. Alexander, she began. No, he said firmly. They pulled out because someone made them think this project was risky. I'm going to find out who. The truth behind the curtain. 2 days later, Alexander returned with an answer. The donor had been approximately none other than Eduardo Salazar, the same man Isabella had met at the gala. Eduardo had hinted that the project was ambitious, but poorly managed, implying that Isabella's lack of experience made it a liability. Her stomach twisted. So it's personal. Alexander's eyes were cold. Yes, and I won't let it stand. The public stand. At the next foundation board meeting, Alexander didn't just defend the project, made a point of announcing his full personal financial backing, enough to replace the withdrawn funds entirely. He did it in front of every donor, board member, and journalist present. This initiative, he said, his voice steady, has my absolute confidence. More importantly, it has my wife's vision and dedication behind it. If anyone doubts its success, I suggest they doubt me instead. The room went silent. Cameras clicked, and Isabella, sitting beside him, felt something shift. He wasn't just protecting her, was placing his own reputation alongside hers. A quiet promise. That night, back at the mansion, Isabella found him on the balcony. The city spread out in glittering silence. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, Alexander replied. Because if they question you, they question us, and I won't let anyone divide us. She stepped closer, resting her head against his shoulder. Then I promise I won't give them a reason to. They stood there for a long time, the night air cool and still. Outside forces might keep testing them, but for now, they had passed this one together. The Cortez Foundation's community project was finally gaining momentum. Construction on the first education center had begun. Local families were volunteering to help, and the press coverage was overwhelmingly positive. For Isabella, it was more than a project, it was a statement that she could contribute to Alexander's world on her own terms. But success has a way of attracting shadows. The headline. It was a Wednesday morning when Isabella's phone began buzzing relentlessly. She was in a meeting with the architectural team when Rosa, her project coordinator, slipped into the room, pale and shaken. You need to see this, Rosa whispered, placing a folded newspaper in front of her. Across the front page, in bold type, was the headline, Misused Funds at Cortez Foundation Project. Beneath it, a photo of Isabella, the construction site, smiling and holding a blueprint no frame to look smug, even guilty. She read the first paragraph, her heart dropping with every word. It claimed that large sums earmarked for the education center had been diverted to personal expenses under her authorization. There were fabricated invoices, distorted figures, and just enough half-truths to make the accusations seem credible. This is ridiculous, Isabella said, her voice trembling. I've never touched the project funds. I haven't even. She stopped, realizing her team was staring at her, fear in their eyes. Alexander's reaction. Alexander arrived at the foundation office within the hour, his presence filling the space like a storm front. He took one look at the article before tossing it aside. This is a hit job, he said flatly. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make it look real. Eduardo? Isabella asked quietly. Alexander's jaw tightened. Possibly, but this has Luciana's style all over it. She's subtle enough to avoid direct fingerprints. Isabella's throat tightened. If people believe this, the project could collapse. Everything we've worked for. Then we won't let them believe it, Alexander said. His voice was calm, but the steel underneath it was unmistakable. We fight back. We clear your name. The board meeting. That afternoon, an emergency board meeting was called. Isabella entered the sleek conference room feeling as though she was walking into a trial. Cameras from the press had been barred from the room, but the atmosphere was no less tense. The chairman, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes, opened the discussion. Mrs. Cortez, the allegations against you are serious. While we hope they are unfounded, the optics are damaging. For the good of the foundation, we may need to consider stepping you back from direct involvement until this is resolved. Alexander's voice cut through the air. Absolutely not. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Alexander one began. "No," he said firmly, his gaze sweeping the table. "You're talking about sidelining the one person who's been the driving force behind this project. Isabella has given her time, her ideas, and her reputation to make this happen. I trust her completely. And if anyone here doesn't, they're free to resign." The room went silent. One or two members exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke up. Alexander had made it clear, loyalty to the projectant to his wife was non-negotiable. Tracing the source. Over the next few days, Alexander's legal team worked with a private investigator to trace the origin of the false documents. The trail was carefully obscured shell companies, anonymous emails, but eventually, a link emerged. One of the consulting firms named in the falsified invoices was owned by a subsidiary of Vega Holdings, Billionaire. When Alexander told Isabella, her first instinct was disbelief. She would go this far just to get me out of the picture? She's been trying to undermine you since the night she came to our door, Alexander said grimly. This is just the boldest move yet. The confrontation. Alexander didn't wait for a formal meeting. He walked into Luciana's downtown office without an appointment, his expression a mask of controlled fury. She looked up from her desk, feigning surprise. "Alexander, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the act," he said. "I know you're behind the false allegations against Isabella." Her smile didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation." "So is defamation," Alexander replied. "And I have enough evidence to ruin you in court." For the first time, Luciana's eyes flickered. "Alexander, you're too smart to think this is about money or publicity. I care about you. I'm trying to save you from a mistake." "My mistake," he said evenly, "was thinking you had any decency left. Stay away from my wife. Stay away from the foundation. If you so much as whisper her name to a reporter, I'll make sure Vega Holdings loses every major contract in this city." He turned and walked out before she could answer. The public statement. That evening, Alexander and Isabella held a press conference at the construction site. The media swarmed, eager for a quote, a stumbling thing to fuel the story. Standing side by side, they addressed the allegations head-on. "These claims are false," Isabella said clearly. "Every peso for this project has been accounted for. Our books are open for audit by any independent authority." Alexander took the microphone. "My wife is the most honest, dedicated person I've ever known. This project will continue, and anyone trying to stop it should be prepared to fail." They didn't take questions. Instead, they walked away together, hand in hand, as camera flashes exploded around them. Aftermath and resolve. The story began to shift within days. Independent auditors confirmed the integrity of the foundation's accounts. Some journalists even began digging into the origins of the fabricated invoices, hinting at a smear campaign. But the damage had left its mark. Isabella felt it in the way certain socialites looked at her, in the guarded tone of some donors who had once been warm. She knew she couldn't erase all the whispers, but she could outlast them. One evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the city lights, Alexander wrapped an arm around her waist. "They'll keep testing us," he said, "trying to find cracks. Then we don't give them any," she replied. The worst of the false allegation scandal had passed. The foundation's reputation was recovering. The education center construction was back on schedule, and Isabella had won quiet admiration from many who doubted her before. But in Alexander's world, victories were rarely permanent. There was always another challenge waiting just out of sight. An unexpected call. It was late on a Thursday evening when Alexander received a call from an old business associate. Isabella was curled up on the sofa, reviewing grant proposals for the foundation, when she noticed the way his jaw clenched as he listened. When he ended the call, she asked, "What's wrong?" He took a long breath. "Luciana's not finished. She's trying a different approach this time. There's a contract tone that could open our company to the entire South American market, but she controls the deciding vote on the board that's approving it. And she's going to make you choose between that contract and me. Isabella said quietly. Alexander met her gaze. Exactly. The dinner invitation. 2 days later, Luciana invited Alexander to a private dinner at an exclusive rooftop restaurant. The implication was clear. Come alone. When he told Isabella, she surprised him. Go, she said simply. Hear her out. He frowned. You think I should entertain whatever game she's playing? I think, Isabella said softly, that you need to close this chapter, not just for me, for you. The offer. The night was clear, the city glowing below like a blanket of stars. Luciana was already seated at a corner table, her dress and posture calculated to project effortless power. Alexander, she said with a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. I ordered your favorite wine. I'm not here for the wine, he replied, taking his seat. What do you want? She leaned forward. The board meeting is next week. If I vote in your favor, the South American expansion goes through, profits will double in less than 2 years. But my support comes with one condition. He didn't need to ask what it was. You end your arrangement with Isabella, Luciana said smoothly. Publicly, you remain free to see her privately if you wish. But she can't be your wife. She's a liability to your image in this market. Alexander's silence stretched. Finally, he said, that's not going to happen. Luciana's expression flickered. Alexander, don't be naive. This is business. No, he said sharply. This is you still believing you can buy my loyalty at the expense of the one person who's never had an agenda with me. She sat back, her smile icy. Then you're making a very expensive mistake. Maybe, Alexander said, standing. But it's mine to make. And when I look back on my life, I'd rather remember the woman I fought for than the deal I closed. He left her sitting there, the untouched wine between them. A surprise ally. The next morning, Isabella received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Cortez, Alexander's mother. For months, Eleanor had been polite, but distant, her approval for the marriage conditional at best. Isabella braced herself for a difficult conversation. Instead, Eleanor said, I heard about the dinner last night. Alexander told me he walked away from the contract. Isabella nodded. He did. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. I've watched my son make deals his whole life. This is the first time I've seen him walk away from one without hesitation. I think I understand now. Understand what? Isabella asked cautiously. That it isn't you who needs to prove herself to use, it's us who need to prove ourselves worthy of the way you love him. Eleanor said, I was wrong about you. Isabella felt an unexpected sting of tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. Eleanor's smile was faint but genuine. Welcome to the family, Isabella. For real this time. The boardroom victory. At the board meeting, the South American deal failed by a narrow margin. Luciana didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. But Alexander's attention wasn't on the lass who was watching how the other directors were reacting. And he saw something he hadn't expected. To major investors, impressed by his refusal to bend to personal pressure, approached him afterward. They had a different proposal that would open an even larger market in Southeast Asia. This time, no strings attached. By the end of the week, the new deal was moving forward. Luciana's leverage was gone. A moment just for them. That night, Alexander and Isabella stood on the balcony of their home, the city sprawling endlessly below. You know, he said, I thought losing that deal would keep me up at night. Turns out, I've never slept better. She leaned against him. Because you did the right thing? Because I didn't lose anything that matters, he said. And I gained something I didn't expect, me mother's respect for you. Isabella smiled. That was worth the contract, worth 10 contracts, he said, kissing her forehead. Full circle. Months later, the education center opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Children ran laughing through the courtyard, their excitement filling the air. Reporters covered the event, but for once, the focus wasn't on gossip, it was on the impact. Eleanor attended, standing proudly beside Isabella for photographs. When someone asked for a comment, she said, this project is exactly the kind of legacy the Cortez family should be building, and it wouldn't exist without Isabella. Alexander, watching from a few feet away, felt an unfamiliar but welcome peace settle over him. They had weathered every storm. Family disapproval, scandal, sabotage, and had come out stronger. The quiet promise. That evening, after the last guest had gone and the courtyard was empty, Alexander took Isabella's hand. No more tests, he said quietly. If the world wants to throw something at us, let it. We're done proving ourselves. She squeezed his hand. We never had to prove it to each other. They stood there for a long time, listening to the distant hum of the city, knowing that whatever came next, whether it was quiet days or more battles, they'd face it together, because some things, once chosen, never needed to be questioned again.